Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Sutta class. As usual, we will start with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome everyone and happy Chinese New Year to everybody who is celebrating. As you can see, today is not a live stream. Today is a recording because I'm unfortunately not free this Tuesday. So I thought I'd just record a video and you can watch that instead. So today we'll just have a short session and continue our topic of Buddhist conflict resolution strategies. And we have been studying the conflict at Kosambi, or the schism at Kosambi, for quite a few weeks now. And we have studied the Buddha's various teachings that he gave to those monks that were quarreling and fighting, and it had gone to the point where the sangha was actually split into two groups. And the Buddha had tried various methods and given them various teachings. And eventually he had to conclude that there was nothing he could do. And he had left the monks at Kosambi and he went and visited some other monks who were practicing well. First, he visited a monk who was practicing alone. And then he visited a really beautiful community, the community of Anuruddha, Nandiya, and Kimbila in the Upakilesa Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 128, which is what we have read the last few weeks and which we finished last week. And so today we will just have a look at a very short story because from those three monks, Anuruddha, Nandiya, and Kimbila, the Buddha went and he retreated. He went into the forest. He decided that it was time for him to be in seclusion and in solitude. So there is a very famous story, very famous, I think, in Asian countries about the Buddha practicing or spending a rains retreat, so 3 months of the Vasa season in the Parilayaka forest together with an elephant. And modern tradition also says together with a monkey, although this is not a story that we find in the canon itself or even in the commentaries. So this is the story that we are going to read today, the Buddha going on retreat and meeting an elephant in that forest. So the first interesting thing that we see there is that the Buddha did go on retreat here, and we have several instances in the canon where we see the Buddha or other monks actually doing a formal kind of meditation retreat. So sometimes it is said in Buddhist circles that meditation retreats are a modern invention and that people in the Buddha's time didn't really do retreats. They kind of had a much more active lifestyle, and retreats isn't something that people should really do, or that's really a modern thing that the Buddha didn't really practice. But we do have a few instances in the canon where we very clearly see that the Buddha went on retreat for several weeks, or in this case, even several months, and where he was completely undisturbed, completely by himself, and nobody went there. And he didn't give any Dhamma talks, he didn't give any teachings. He just really, really spent time by himself. So it's definitely, we can see in the canon in a few instances that meditation retreats also were a thing even back then. It's not necessarily a modern invention. And yeah, so I think we can just start reading our little story for today about the Buddha in the Parilayaka forest and then see how that goes. And this story is found in two places in the canon. One is in the Vinaya, in the chapter that deals with the schism at Kosambi, where we have summaries or even fairly detailed descriptions of all the events that happened during the schism and what the Buddha did and how he tried to resolve it and all the Vinaya procedures and so on. So this story is found there as well, and this is where we're going to read from today. And the other place where we find this in the canon is in the Udana. This is a collection in the Khuddaka Nikaya that has fairly short suttas usually. And yeah, that's the other place where we can find it, but I think I've decided that we're going to read from the Vinaya text. So there is a link in the description box if you want to read along. This is Khandaka number 10, and we are going to read from Ajahn Brahmali's translation. And this is the paragraph number 4.6.1, but the link should take you straight there, so you don't need to search. And so the heading here is called The Account of Going to Pali Layaka. So this might sound a little bit strange for people who know the story, because usually that forest is known under the name Pali Layaka, not Pali Layaka. It looks like a typo. And the reason for that is that Ajahn Brahmali is translating from the Burmese version of the Pali text, and there are sometimes some spelling variants between the Burmese and the Sinhala version. So we are more familiar usually with the Sinhala names of places and of people, but here Ajahn Brahmali has chosen to use the Burmese name. So this is not a typo, it's just a variant in the Pali text. And we see the story picks up exactly at the place where we left off last time, because the story says, the Buddha then instructed, inspired, and gladdened Venerable Anuruddha, Venerable Nandya, and Venerable Kimbila with the teaching. He then got up from his seat and set out wandering towards Parilayaka. So obviously this is exactly the end of the Upakilesa Sutta that we read last time. And now the Buddha is going to Parilayaka, the forest. And we can also see here in Ajahn Brahmali's translation, the Venerable Kimbila is not called Venerable Kimbila, he's called Venerable Kimila. Again, this is not a typo. This is a spelling variant between the Burmese and the Sinhala version of the Pali text. So, and when he eventually arrived, he stayed in a protected forest grove at the foot of an auspicious sal tree. While he was staying by himself, the Buddha thought, when I was previously surrounded by people, I was not at ease because of those monks at Kosambi who were quarreling, arguing, and creating legal issues in the sangha. But now that I'm alone without a companion, I'm happy and at ease because I'm apart from those monks at Kosambi. So here we see the Buddha going into seclusion, enjoying the bliss of seclusion, enjoying the bliss of being away from quarrelsome people. And I think this is something that we can probably all relate to if we have been involved in conflict in our communities or in our families or our workplace or wherever for an extended period of time. And we put a lot of energy into trying to resolve the issues and trying to settle the conflict and going back and forth between the different parties and trying to somehow reconcile them. And all our efforts were in vain. And obviously the atmosphere was very toxic and it was very draining. Then I think we can all relate to that bliss that you would feel if you left that situation and went somewhere else. And so even as an arahant, even as a fully enlightened Buddha, the Buddha can still enjoy that bliss of seclusion. And we can also see, even as an arahant, even as a Buddha, even a person with the amount of compassion that a Buddha has. So a Buddha has completely unlimited compassion towards all beings. He can still choose to leave this kind of toxic situation if there's nothing he can do. So he tried everything that he could. He really, out of compassion, tried to help those monks. But when he concluded that there was nothing he can do, then the wisdom side of him, like compassion always needs a counterpart in wisdom. So by wisdom, he can see that there's nothing he can do, and the wisdom then can tell him that it's better to withdraw from such a situation and go elsewhere. And this is exactly what the Buddha did here. So compassion doesn't force you to stay in a really toxic situation if you can't change it. Then it's better to apply wisdom and to go somewhere else. And that applies obviously whether you're a Buddha or whether you're an ordinary person. For an ordinary person, it's even more difficult to help than for a Buddha. So withdrawing from such a difficult situation, withdrawing from such a conflict can often be the right choice. And the Buddha, again, is modeling that behavior here for us. So for us, we don't have to feel guilty if we withdraw from such a situation, if we take care of ourselves first, and if we don't force ourselves to stay in such a toxic atmosphere. And yeah, as we see, the Buddha now went to a better place and is enjoying the bliss there. And the story continues. At that time, there was a large bull elephant who was surrounded by a crowd of male and female elephants, by young elephants and baby elephants. He ate grass with broken tips, and other elephants ate the branches that he had folded together. He drank muddied water, and when he was immersed in a pool, the female elephants came rubbing their bodies against his. He considered this and thought, why don't I leave the herd and stay by myself? He then left the herd and went to Parilayaka, to the Buddha at the foot of the auspicious sal tree in the protected forest grove. And he attended on the Buddha using his trunk to set out water for drinking and water for washing and to clear the vegetation. He thought, when I was previously surrounded by elephants, I was not at ease because of the other elephants. But now that I'm alone without a companion, I'm happy and at ease because I'm apart from those elephants. So now we have the story of the elephant. The elephant appears, and there is a large bull elephant here. And same as the Buddha. I mean, obviously, there's the obvious parallel of the Buddha being this like larger than life kind of human, this radiant personality that is overshadowing everybody else because he is the Buddha. And of course, now there's the parallel with this gigantic elephant. And that elephant is also suffering from the herd that is living around him. Everybody is following him. And they're also young elephants, they are babies. So probably they're poking him and they're playing with him and they're behaving inappropriately. Same like those kind of small-minded monks in Kosambi. And constantly they are sort of annoying him and sort of poking him and rubbing against him. And in this example here, of course, they are eating his food even. So the other elephants are eating the branches that he had folded. So they're eating his food and they are making his water dirty. So they're polluting his environment. And again, that's a parallel to how the monks at Kosambi are polluting the atmosphere in the sangha and the environment around the Buddha. And that elephant, just like the Buddha, considered that it's really unpleasant to stay there and decides to stay by himself. And then he also goes into the same forest as the Buddha and he meets the Buddha there. And then he takes the opportunity to make some good karma and he attends on the Buddha. So this is a very important part of this story because as you probably all know, it is next to impossible for a fully ordained monk or fully ordained nun to stay alone in the forest for an extended period of time without any contact to another human being. Even just staying for a few days is very difficult because of the way the Vinaya, so the monastic rules, are structured. So especially because in order to get food, we have to have contact with another human being. So we have to have contact with another being, not necessarily human as we see here, because here there is an elephant. So according to monastic rules, we are not allowed to store food overnight. So every day we have to find new food. And if we stay in the forest, we're not allowed to pick fruits. We're not allowed to dig up roots. We're not allowed to collect seeds or to collect nuts or anything like this, because all of that would be damaging plants. And damaging plants is also against the monastic rules. Or digging the earth to dig up roots That would also be another monastic rule that would be broken if we did that. And even if we pick up fruits that have already fallen to the ground, then that would be food that hasn't been offered, and then again we couldn't eat that. So it's not, according to the monastic rules, it's not actually possible to stay alone in the forest. And of course, the Buddha, as the ultimate role model for the sangha, has to follow the monastic rules. So in this story, obviously, there needs to be someone that is helping the Buddha to keep all those monastic rules. So for that reason, now there is this elephant here, and that elephant is offering the food and preparing water. It also says here, the elephant is clearing the vegetation. So again, when the Buddha lives in the forest, he needs to have a path where he can walk around and he can do walking meditation, and probably he needs a place to sleep and or to lie down. And again, you can't remove the plants that are already there, like you can't damage those plants. So you need that elephant to do it for the Buddha, so that the Buddha can actually live in that forest without breaking all these monastic rules. I think I've mentioned before, later tradition also added a monkey to this story. So in the canon itself, there's only the elephant, and just now I also checked some of the commentaries, and in the commentaries also there's only the elephant. So the monkey, the addition of the monkey seems to be a fairly modern invention, but it is a very popular story, and that monkey is very well known in traditional Asian countries. So I just wanted to mention that in modern times there is a monkey here as well, and the story with the monkey goes that the monkey was, of course, a monkey has 2 arms. So a monkey is, it's much easier for a monkey to do all the services that sort of are required, much easier than an elephant that only has 1 trunk. So according to the story, it was the monkey that was picking the fruits and the food and was offering the food and also washing the Buddha's bowl and things like that. And according to the story, the monkey was so excited that it had the opportunity to serve the Buddha and to make so much good karma that it was just jumping around like crazy, jumping from branch to branch. And because it was overexcited, it wasn't mindful and it missed a branch and it fell down and it died, and it was immediately reborn in a pretty high deva realm because of all the joy it was feeling about the karma that it had made. So that's the story with the monkey. Anyway, but in this story here, there's only an elephant. And both the Buddha and the elephant are enjoying the seclusion in this forest. And then the story continues. After considering his own seclusion and reading the mind of the elephant, the Buddha exclaimed this inspired utterance. The mind of this large elephant, with tusks like chariot poles, agrees with the mind of the sage, since they each delight in the forest solitude. So the Buddha is reading the mind of the elephant, and he sees that they're both thinking alike. So both of these great beings are thinking exactly the same way. Again, this story, or this point of the story, shows us that the story is deliberately constructed to have the elephant as a parallel to the Buddha. And the Buddha even makes a small gatha, a small poem about this parallel and about him and the elephant being so much alike. Yeah, and again stresses that both of them delight in the forest solitude. And then the story is already over. It's a very, very short story. And the story says, when the Buddha had stayed at Parilayaka for as long as he liked, he set out wandering towards Savatthi. And when he eventually arrived, he stayed in the Jeta Grove Anathapindika's monastery. So the Buddha eventually leaves Parilayaka. According to other stories, he stayed in Parilayaka for 3 months for the entire rains retreat. So he had a really nice and long seclusion and a real proper retreat in Parilayaka. And yeah, this story, I think it's pretty obvious to all of you who are watching this. This story is very unusual for many reasons. there isn't really much of a Dhamma teaching here other than that it is good to withdraw from toxic situations, that it's really good to take care of oneself. And as we have heard over and over again in also other suttas that we have read about this conflict, the Buddha is continually stressing that if you cannot find good companions, then it's much better to walk alone, to be alone. In the Upakilesa Sutta, we also had this verse, walk like a tusker in the woods alone. So again, that elephant metaphor being like an elephant, a big elephant in the woods alone. Unless you can find a worthy companion, but in this case, the Buddha obviously had problems with his companions. So he put his own advice into practice and went into the forest alone. And as you can see, this story is very unusual because there is this animal, an elephant, that had such a prominent role, and it's actually more like a fable than like a proper story that would actually have happened, like a realistic story. Because here the elephant is pretty much portrayed like a human being, thinking like a human, having feelings like a human, having a reasoned cognition like a human. His mind is even compared to the Buddha's own mind, which is quite amazing for an animal. So usually in the canon, we assume that animals don't have the ability to reason and to develop their mind in the same way that a human can. So this is very unusual for the canon. So, and especially to have like these kind of ideas about seclusion, about withdrawing from the herd, about being so much alike to the Buddha. That's really unusual. And this is more a feature of stories that are somewhat later. So for example, in Jataka texts, there are lots of animals that talk to each other, that are speaking, that act like human beings. So that's much more a feature of other types of texts, not really like not really a feature of usual sutta texts. And so this is one indication that these kind of texts could be somewhat late. We've talked about the Jatakas before. So this is somewhat similar to a Jataka in that respect. And we have talked about Jatakas. Jatakas are Indian folk tales. They're somewhat older than Buddhism, but they got incorporated into Buddhism at a later time. And this text also seems to be somewhat a little bit late, not very late, but a little bit late, because it is not included in one of the main four Nikayas. As I mentioned, this is in the Udana collection of the Khuddaka Nikaya and in the Vinaya. And we know that Vinaya texts are a little bit later than Sutta texts usually. There are very, very, very few parts of the Vinaya that are as old as the Suttas. A few, but very, very few. And the Udana itself is usually considered an early text, but the Udana also has parts that are earlier and parts that are later. And usually the gathas, so the poems, are earlier, and the stories around them are somewhat later. And so that also gives us an indication that this story with the elephant could be a little bit later than the early time of the Buddha. And for those of you who are interested, there is a very fascinating and interesting study that was done by Bhante Analayo about the Udana collection, comparing the Pali version of the Udana with Chinese versions. And he also came to the conclusion that the things that are probably the oldest and which are closest between the collections are the gathas, so the verses, and that there is quite a bit of variance in the prose parts of the Udana, so they don't seem to be quite as early as the verses. And so both from the content of the story about an elephant that acts like a human, and from other criteria, from comparative studies, we can probably conclude that this story is a little bit late. And we can see that people were fascinated by these kind of stories over a long period of time. A lot more details got added in the commentaries. So this story is mentioned quite a few times, for example, in the Dhammapada commentary. And with like more details, more features, and so on. And as I mentioned, in more modern times, even the story was still expanded and enlarged, and a monkey was added, and many more details were added. So we can see that these stories evolve over a long period of time, and they inspire Buddhists over a long period of time. So this was the story about the Parilayaka forest. As I mentioned, just a really cute little story, but it belongs to our topic of the conflict at Kosambi, so I didn't want to leave it out. And it is very famous in traditional Buddhist countries. Next time, we are going to continue with the Kosambi conflict, and we're going to see how the Buddha finally settles it. So next time is probably going to be the last session about the Kosambi conflict. And we see how the monks finally see reason and how they all go to the Buddha and ask him to help them to reconcile. So if you have any questions about today's story with the elephant, you can ask them next time, or you can leave them in the comment section, and then I will see them and I will try to answer them. And otherwise, again, happy Chinese New Year, and I hope to see you all next week. We will end with 3 sadhus as usual. Feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And have a good week.